Hey there, folks. Welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And apparently, this is a big one. We're going to be talking about the newest album from Mac Miller called Swimming. You know, if there was a review that I did not really want to make, it's probably this one. And yes, I know that sounds bad, believe me, but it comes more from a place of frustration on my part more than anything, because I tried to get into Mac Miller. I really did. I revisited every single damn album in his discography before making this review. I really wanted to understand what the hell his audience sees in him, spanning a career that's evolved from dumbass but kind of funny frat bro rap to something that's a little bit more pensive and reflective and borderline mature. And I can't deny that the guy's got some decent taste when it comes to production and guest stars. He will shell out some impressively lush and detailed instrumentals, from his textured, grimy, almost New York-inspired hip-hop on records like Watching Movies with the Sound Off and Good AM, to more of the jazzy, alternative R&B of the Divine Feminine. But man alive, I just cannot get into him as a performer, rapper, or singer. As a rapper, his wordplay is often way clumsier than it should be, although it has gotten a little bit better, and I've never been remotely impressed by his content or any sense of thematic weight. And as a singer, oh boy. Look, there is a way that his vocal timbre and delivery could potentially work if you pair with more amateurish, rough around the edges production, or truly raw, vulnerable subject matter. It's what Chance the Rapper and Tyler the Creator did. But when you place him opposite so many genuinely vocally talented R&B singers and some great production that's a little smoother, it's impossible for me not to cringe at how flat, off-key, and sloppy his singing is. I'm sorry, you put him on songs like Anderson .Paak, Bilal, CeeLo Green, and Ariana Grande, and you expect him not to sound instantly outclassed in every way? And that's before you get to the fact that he can have shockingly little charisma as an MC. And this is coming from a guy who listens to more deceptively low-key and monotone rappers than even him. But guys like Ka and Rock Marciano and Evidence and LMNO, they've got a magnetism and intensity that Mac Miller has never had. And when you couple it with too many records that all have a bad case of the bloat, almost like an indie version of G-Eazy, I was not looking forward to another hour-long project from Mac Miller with Swimming. But hey, it was either this or watching YG fumble things on his next project, and that looks to be even more depressing when I review that, but we'll get to it. Screw it, how was Swimming? Well, it's a Mac Miller album, which means that I have to assume that the fans will probably get into it. He's got his audience, he's got a set of critics who are more on board with him. Fine, you can have him. I'm a little bit envious, honestly. But I'll freely admit that after the first half dozen or so listens I gave this project and then making this review, I'm never going back to Swimming. And that while I was listening to Swimming, my constant thought was that I'd rather be listening to anything else besides Swimming, because it's an overlong language slog through the most basic sense of ennui, and a lot of forced attempts at sophisticated, mature hip-hop and R&B I've heard in some time. And while there are far fewer guests on this project, it means you got that much more unfiltered Mac Miller to deal with, and that is, at best, a lateral move. So yeah, this isn't good. Didn't like it whatsoever. So let's start off with Mac Miller himself, because it's his delivery and it's his presentation that's always pushed me away, and it's honestly a little bit tricky to articulate why nothing he does works for me. As a singer, it's a little more simple. He does not project presence or character whatsoever behind the microphone with his moaning delivery, and no matter how many overdubs you drop on top, he can only barely stay on key. He's not a good singer. Now for the former issue, look, there's not a lot one can really do to escape having no palpable charisma or distinctive character or compelling flair as a vocalist. But you can at least compensate for rough or mediocre singing, either by embracing rougher and more forgiving production, or piling up enough overdubs and multi-tracking or vocal layers or autotune or to obscure it. And Swimming tries more of the latter. But the problem with that is that if you don't produce the vocals right, it elongates the track and strips out any sense of tightness, which then when you have more organic bass lines from Thundercat or Damn Funk, it only serves as a really jarring contrast that utterly kills the momentum of the production. I'll say more about that in a bit, but then we got Mac Miller as an MC, and while I was often most annoyed how often he just falls off the beat for no adequately explained reason, or that weird, awkward slowness in his flow that comes out of nowhere, what irked me even more was the overall mood and energy he was trying to bring to the table with this album. It's most reminiscent of the dispassionate lethargy that Drake brings to his more monotonous cuts, but minus the edge or occasional bit of vocal flair that Drake is capable of as a better singer and a better rapper. Yes, even coming off of Scorpion scorpion. And you know what? I get that it's part of the point, that Mac Miller's treading through a listless ennui, even despite his success, trying to get over this breakup, something that he can't quite put his finger on that drags him down even though he thinks he's moved on. But there's two major problems here. First, the obvious. If your general demeanor does not convey even a shred of emotion or to hook me more, I'm not really gonna care. Hell, the only reason anybody will come back to this will be if they can relate to that single dimension of emotionality. But more to the point, you should only embrace such a low-key, moaning monotone if you are certain your content will be meaty and heavy enough in order to hook your audience. And I'll be blunt, Mac Miller's not there. In terms of other low-key MCs, he does not have the meditative poise of Ka, nor the tempestuous stillness of Evidence, nor the paranoia of Elemento, nor the more detailed ruthlessness of Rot Marciano. All rappers who don't bring a lot of obvious emotion, but are anchored in wordplay with real distinctive personality. And yet with Mac Miller, well, let's get this out of the way now. Whenever he tries to brag about being the boss or the GOAT, it's about the furthest thing from believable in my camp, not because he's got no real conviction. And yet, if he's trying to intend this as a subversion of those tropes in a more money, more problems mold, there's very little of that edge or cutting insight to undercut it significantly. And when you factor in any significant or distinctive detail, what you wind up with are lines that feel like they're cribbed from the skeletons of hip-hop punchlines, stripped down to the most basic and easily digestible material for the mainstream. I made the comparison to G-Eazy before, but honestly, he could fit right in. And again, stripping things down to the bluntest point can work if you're aiming to hit a transcendent moment or a point through delivery and contrast. But since we've established that Mac Miller's got no potent delivery and nearly always sticks with this style, so there is no contrast, it leads to no significant quotable lines, and it gets really boring really fast. And of course, some of this is built off of Mac Miller's clearly unrequited feelings for his ex-girlfriend Ariana Grande, and if there's anything close to an arc of this album, it'd be learning to cope with it in some way, shape, or form. And again, while I get the artistic intent here, specifically the recognition that this sort of heartbroken healing will take some time, and it is kind of deliberately tedious to work through, and that, for the record, that is all true, that intent only works if the execution can set the framing for the audience to get involved and have that same level of emotional introspection. If you can indulge a comparison to film for a second, when directors like Andrei Tarkovsky and Michael Haneke choose to linger on empty, barren tableaus where it almost feels too normal and too extended, it's intended to draw forth introspection and that deeper audience connection, get you to think. And music can definitely do the same with those same barren spaces. But Mac Miller is still pushing in the bragging and the parties and trying to subvert the emotions they bring, which operates at cross purposes with the minimalism and leaves the payoff feeling really hollow and painfully underwhelming, and let's call it out, basic. And that's not even getting to the galling fact by the end, it's clear that Mac Miller hasn't really learned or changed all that much, which neuters the stakes and leaves our only investment point as Mac Miller's emotional dynamics himself. And as I said, that's a problem. Now, as you might have noticed, I haven't really called out any individual cuts on this project, because this record intentionally doesn't really have an obvious single, it's intended more as a longer album statement. All fine and good. And to Mac Miller's credit, if you can ignore him, the production's easily the most enjoyable element of the entire project. It's not as lush or textured as Good AM or The Divine Feminine, but there is a certain tasteful, languid vibe that could potentially work if the production didn't keep wedging in keyboard lines or samples to clash with the guitars or rival Mac Miller for droning annoyance. It's not like the guitar lines or arranged strings are given that much warmth or distinctive texture as it is to flesh out any sort of melody amidst the unsteady, watering warbles that pulse through hurt feelings or wings or small words, the last one probably being the worst song on the album. But the watery funk of What's the Use could have potentially worked if it didn't have all those flat, half chiptune, buzzy drone layers. Same with the horn-inflected funk on Ladders. So could Self-Care Oblivion if it didn't tack on those auto-tuned ad-libs that don't match the smoother groove at all before switching into a moaning, watery R&B vibe that can't seem to decide if the synthesizer are going to build some real color or gloss and just kind of fits in a middle range and goes nowhere. And when you factor in how none of this is sequenced in a way to build momentum, and when you also have production from Flying Lotus on cuts like Conversation Part 1, that level of failure is almost impressive. And even sequenced in a way to pay off a more natural arc, given that it seems like Mac Miller resolves the emotional tension on Wings by saying that the pain doesn't really bother him from the breakup, and that doesn't play like a fake out when you consider the braggadocious conflict and the grooves that'll come after it, and that's before you consider how much the hip-hop beats often feel so leaden and overweight and heavy in their own right, which makes this all the more excruciating. And again, Everything I'm saying about this messy, discordant features, they will inevitably be countered by, it's intentional. It's to highlight the contradictory emotions of ennui that come post-breakup. It's not supposed to be traditionally enjoyable. And you know what? Okay, fine. I could actually see that. But there's a difference between a complicated emotional tapestry in the wake of recovery and an overindulgent, tonally dissonant slog that repeatedly neuters its own tension and drama through bad delivery, sloppy construction, and an inability to bring any sort of real lyrical nuance or thematic weight to the table beyond the very most basic. More to the point, it screams of the sort of forced sophistication in its presentation that doesn't actually have the emotional maturity or artistic daring or vulnerability to really force Mac Miller to confront his issues or change beyond a surface level. And sometimes doesn't even get there. Hell, for an easy parallel, look at Miranda Lambert's 2016 album, The Weight of These Wings, which is also way too long and rooted in scattered emotionality in the aftermath of a breakup, one where she cheated, but it had the courage to dig deep into the existential crises at the core of her art to drive that reckless choice to cheat and then end her relationship with Blake Shelton, approaching middle age without a clear sense of purpose or home as a woman in country, alcohol abuse, breaking against deeply ingrained traditional values, and a real loss of her faith. In contrast, Mac Miller, he's still stoned in the kiddie pool, and he's not impressing me whatsoever. Strong 3 out of 10, and I can't remotely recommend this. Look, I'll freely admit I was not a fan of Mac Miller going in. Again, I didn't really want to do this review. I'm expecting the backlash, but this was a tedious and often genuinely unpleasant listening experience for me. I just did not like this at all. Fans, you can keep Mac Miller. Have fun. Preferably keep him far away from any place where I can hear him, though, because, yeah, I'm not going back to this. Sorry. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe. I'd be more than grateful. I know I was really negative, guys. I'm sorry. I tried. I went through all of his discography. I really tried to get into this guy, but this album was not good. It's not thematically consistent. The delivery does not work. And even a lot of the production, I don't think it's as good as The Divine Feminine. And it doesn't have the same color or flair that we saw on Good AM or even watching movies with the sound off. There are records he's made that I could kind of tolerate, but this was not one of them. But hey, if you want to buy the record, links down there below. I got the poll up there for y'all to tell me how wrong I am. Sorry guys, I tried. But again, I listened to this, and then I re-listened to my favorite album thus far this year, Chime by Dessa, which also touches on a lot of the same themes and ideas, but there was so much more layers of depth and genuine intensity and more ideas going on that didn't feel so cliched and basic. Again, he's the more indie rap version of a G-Eazy to me, and he's just about as boring. But beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, I'm all ears. And if you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process so I don't have to cover stuff like this, or potentially if you want me to cover more of it, or just support the channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote for my schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you guys get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. More details right over there. If you want to see my schedule, to my Instagram, link down there below. But till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.